Namaskar and welcome to Psychology, Debunking Mythology. Today we have a very special guest, and our goal is always to present facts on the history. History brings identity, and our last sessions on Ramayana and Mahabharata have been hugely successful with all of you, and we will continue that momentum. And yesterday's shows also on astronomy, Vedic astronomy also was very popular. We'll continue that. Today, this particular guest has helped revive or discover so many places of Vedic heritage that, he was given a Padma Shri by the government of India. So, without delay, let us welcome Sheikh Mohammed, a very well-known personality across the world. Namaskar. Uh,
Namaskar, namaskar.
so we are going to talk about the Buddhist sites that you mentioned.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, great relevance to all the people here.
Yeah, yeah.
So which
So,
site are we talking about?
so far we have been speaking about mainly about the Hindu heritage sites, but now it would be about Buddhist sites like Nalanda, Vaishali, Kesariya, where we have very huge monasteries, Buddhist educational institutions, and also Buddhist stupas, huge stupas. But this will also be not only the story of Nalanda, Vaishali, and other things. It would be equally, along with that one, this would be the story of the discovery of Indian heritage. Indian heritage had a problem. The major problem was we were not in the habit of writing down our historical things. While European countries, they wrote down everything, we were not in the habit of writing down, and rather we what we did is we by hearted everything. There were many people who could, when from their, I mean, this from, I mean, they could recite the whole Veda, Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samveda, Atharveda, and all of them. So we depended mostly on our memory. It was a fantastic memory also, but it just got its own pitfalls also. That whenever a major calamity comes out, the whole population is wiped out, and then the memory is also wiped out, and then everything was forgotten. Then how did we start discovering our own heritage? And for that, the Europeans who had come to India, they had made an outstanding contribution in that field. Now in India also there is a trend to criticize those European scholars, saying they were all missionaries, they were all evangelists. Of course, that might have been one of the factors. But at the same time, the contribution they have made for the history of India, for history of archaeology, for history of our civilization, that is tremendous, tremendous. And it was from there we came to know that we had a very long history. Otherwise, from Puranas, Bhagavad Purana, Vishnu Purana, Vayu Purana, we knew that our history went back only to 5th, 6th century BC at most, not beyond that. And that too, that was a very hazy thing. We did not know that Ashoka was an Indian. And equally, we did not know that Buddha was an Indian. We all thought that Buddha was a foreigner, he was an Ethiopian, or he was an African, because some of the sculptures which was excavated at various places that had that curly hair, so an Ethiopian connection was there. And similarly about Ashoka, people thought that he is a Sri Lankan. And now today we are going to deal how did we start discovering about our heritage. Now let us go to this one, our PPT, so that we can share the screen. Can we do that?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So, Sri K.K. Mohammed ji, the Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Puran,
Yeah.
it announces the birth of Buddha.
Yes. 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 Yes.
He says that Hikateshu,
Hmm.
born to Anjaneya in the state of Hikateshu, which is Bihar, Magad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does announce that. And also, his mother is announced and the place is announced.
Yes. 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 So we knew only up to the period of Buddha, that is up to 6th century BC.
Actually,
That is there.
the
Huh.
calculation of Buddha
Yeah.
mentioned in Quran that he
Yeah.
is going to appear in the Shunga dynasty,
Hmm. So
which I am right now.
Shunga.
Shunga dynasty,
Huh.
like when the Shunga dynasty is ruling,
Hmm.
because he comes right after Maurya period. He is
Hmm.
not under the Maurya.
See.
So when you say the disappearance of Krishna, if somebody says 3102 BC, which is approximately the time people claim based on Vedic astronomy, which is 5,122 years, and you say 1150, so
Yeah.
approximately 3,800 years back is Buddha appeared. Now, I'll wait up to you to clarify that.
Yeah.
But yes, I.
Yes.
Uh,
There is a difference between Vedic dating and archaeological dating.
correct, correct,
And there is an astronomical dating also,
correct.
because according to them, that this Kali Yuga starts from 3125 BC.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So we have Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga.
Yes.
So Dwapara Yuga ends in 3125, and then the Kali Yuga starts.
So,
But we don't go as archaeologists, we don't go by that dating. We have a different dating.
yes.
So according to that, our dating, Buddha is in 6th century BC,
Okay.
and our this one Sri Krishna, that is Hastinapura dating, that this one Mahabharata dating would be 1200 BC,
Okay.
and Rama is definitely before Krishna, because according to this our calculation, Malsya Kurma Varahasya Narasinghi Vamanatide Ramo Ramasya. So according to that, then Rama should be around 1500 BC or 1000, this one 400 BC, something like that one. And Mahabharata is 1200 BC, and it was a fight because after the discovery of iron, the metal iron, that is why you have such a horrific battle, and all of them have been revised also. That also we should accept, because Mahabharata was earlier, it was only 8,000 verses. Then it was known as Jaya at that time. Then it increased, many interpolations came, it became 24,000 verses. And now the present Mahabharata, we have what? 1 lakh verses. So we go by our archaeological dating. So archaeological dating, we knew that our history goes back only up to 600 BC, but we did not know very clearly that about Buddha. Many people thought that he is this one African, because I'm talking about our this one. And now, then how did we come to know? No, he was an Indian, and this was Magadha. He was born in Magadha, and then Vaishali, Nalanda, and all these things. That discovery started. So now we are going into our PPT, and we'll be gradually speaking about it.
Okay.
Can we do that?
Yes, please.
Share?
Yes.
So this is Firozshah Kotla in Delhi. Firozshah Kotla was the fifth city of Delhi because it was this Firozshah Kotla was established by Firoz Tughlaq. But this has a very, unique structure here. If you look at this one, this is a pillar. This was actually a pillar, an Ashokan pillar, and this has got inscriptions also. So Firozshah, he was in 1350, 58, he became the king. When he saw this one, he asked many people, what is this thing? He got many of the Vedic Pandits of his period also. Can you just read? But nobody could read this one. That was the inscription. And then because he saw it in Punjab, and Punjab, because of his curiosity, he got it transported to Delhi, which was his capital, without knowing what is the importance of this one. Then some of the European travelers, for example, in 1611, William Finch came to India. He saw this one because it was a very smooth one, very beautiful one. He made a theory this might have been made by Alexander, who had conquered India earlier. So in order to commemorate his victory, he has got it done. Because at that time, British people, whatever they saw, if it is a very outstanding one, they used to give the fathership at this one to a European person. So he also gave the same thing. Although it was during the Jahangir's period, because he came to India in Jahangir's period in 1611. Jahangir ruled, as we all know, from 1606 up to 1628. He ruled the country. It was at that time. But they could not read what was written there. So this is in Firozshah Kotla. So it became a kind of paheli. What is, nobody knew what it was. Then this is in Allahabad fort. So we should remember, keep it in our mind. It was in Punjab, not in Delhi. Presently it is in Delhi, but it was originally, the original location was in Punjab. Then the second, because he went along with Jahangir, he saw the second pillar. It was in Allahabad fort. This also had a similar inscription. So he thought again, this was done by Alexander the Great in 3rd century BC, 3rd and 4th century BC. So that was written also, and many people came to know about it. This is in Bihar. The name of the place is Loria Nandangad. Some of the scholars went to that place also, and again they saw it. So for the first time, because the same kind of inscription now, just think of it. One is in Punjab, another one is in Allahabad,
Aman.
it is in UP, and the third one is in Bihar, and then again this is Loria Ariraj, another part of the same Bihar. So there also you have the same pillar, and it's a very beautiful inscription also, and nobody was able to decipher it. And then this is from Udaygiri. Where is Udaygiri? That is in Orissa. So in Orissa also you have got it's the same kind of inscription. So that is in the easternmost part of the India. And then this is the man who discovered another inscription in Girnar. He is Mr. Toad. Where is Girnar? That is in Rajasthan. That is the westernmost part of India. So just leave the northernmost part of India, that is Punjab, UP, Bihar, Orissa, and then Rajasthan, and then going down Ajanta, Ellora, because by that time in 1818, 1818, Sanchi stupa that was discovered by Henry Taylor, Kandagiri that is in Orissa that was discovered by Andrew Stradling. In 1824, Major told he discovered many things in Rajasthan, and all of them were having the same thing, but people were not able to read, people were not able to decipher. And then it went on for some times. Now the question was, what is written that there, about whom it is written, what is the message, and who was that king who was ruling the whole country at that time in a remote age? These were the questions. And now comes the eureka moments of Indian history and archaeology. How did it happen? How did they decipher this Indian Brahmi script? Because nobody knew it was Brahmi. How did they decipher Brahmi script? For deciphering any script, even the Harappan script has not been deciphered so far. But for deciphering, at least you have to have a bilingual or a trilingual inscription. In Egypt, we have got that hieroglyphic that was discovered because they got a trilingual inscription in 3 languages. So one language which that was in Greek, and Greek was known. So because of on the basis of the Greek inscription, they could discover hieroglyphic also. They could discover the Coptic language also, which was unknown till that time. And similarly, in Mesopotamia, that was also not known, but they got a trilingual inscription. So far in India, we have not been able to get a trilingual inscription. So we have not been able to decipher our own Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. But here, Brahmi script is concerned, there was partly they were successful because when the Greek people came to India, in the northwestern frontier and other places, they had issued some of the coins. These are known as Bactrian coins. BACT, Bactrian coins. And these coins, they had the name of the king in Greek and also in Brahmi script also. So Greek is already known language. I mean, one could read it. And the name of one king was Agathocles, Agatha, Agathocles. So that much letters from Brahmi, they could get it, Agathocles. And then there were 2-3 names of other kings also. So they could get from, I mean, some 10-15 words they could read. So that was the first eureka moments of Indian history. For reading all these things, whatever pillars you have seen, whatever inscription you have seen, for reading all those things, these were the first clue. And there was a man known as a great scholar, known as Christian Lassen. It was for he who had for the first time read about the names of these kings, and on the basis of which he could get the words also. This word is this one, this is the, this is ta, this is sa, this is a. So he discovered it that way. But then there were many other words also. So for that, there was another breakthrough. So John James Prinsep was there at that time. He was working in a mint at that time in Calcutta. So somebody forwarded some of the estampages of the inscription which was found in Sanchi Stupa. Estampage was of 21 inscriptions were forwarded to him. He was a great scholar and he was peering through the whole day, he was peering through the whole thing without being able to understand. He tried his level best, he could not do anything. and he died at a very young age also. But he was able to do one thing. He saw that all these words, I mean, when this one, stem pages, they have got different letters are there in the beginning. But at the same time, in the last portion, all of them are ending in the same words. 3, 4 letters are almost the same thing in all the 21 things, in all the 21 stem pages. So he made a wild guess. He just thought, a wild guess, he just thought, these are the names of the people who had donated this thing, this particular stone. And why the last portion is the same, which he read as Danam. What is Danam? Danam is donated by so and so. This was a wild guess. So on the basis of this Agathocles and the names of some other kings and the last portion Danam, he was able to decipher the whole script. So that was the virtual eureka moments of Indian history. And now comes some of the important problem. And now when they started deciphering this thing, they just wanted to know who was this man who was ruling the whole country, such a great king. Because Chandragupta Maurya, many people knew about him. His son was Bindusara. His son was Ashoka. So there were references in many of our Bhagavad Purana also, Vayu Purana also, and Vishnu Purana also about all these kings. But in this one, the name of the man was not, I mean, in whatever they had seen, the inscription they had seen, his name was not Ashoka, his name was not Chandragupta Maurya, his name was not Bindusara, but it was Piyadashi. Piyadashi. So who is this king who was known as Piyadashi? Nobody knew at that time. But there was one king, he's a Sri Lankan king. His name is Piyadashi. So it might be him, but now the question comes that Sri Lanka is a very small country. How could he conquer the entire India of this, I mean, of ancient period? So some people said, no, it could be the man who had converted him. So he might have given, this Indian Piyadashi might have given his name to the Sri Lankan Piyadashi. And then they got that an inscription known as Berat inscription. Berat is in, we all know, this is in Jaipur city. So in Jaipur city, this inscription, this read like this one. Piyadashi Laja Magade Sangam Abhivadadenum Bhagavado Buddhasa. Bhagavado Buddhasa. So they could connect it. It is with Buddha and Buddhist principles. And it was issued by Priyadashi Laja Magade. It was issued by Priyadashi Raja of Magade. So that means he was a Magadhan king. Now we wanted to point out who was this Magadeshi Raja, king of Magadha, who was attached with Buddhism, because Bhagavade Buddhena, that was also given. So that was the second problem. So some of the people argued it was Ashoka Maurya, but many of the scholars did not agree with that one. So then there was another inscription. This inscription was from Mysore. This is known as Maski inscription. In Maski inscription, his full name has been given as Devanam Piya Ashokasya. Devanam Piya Ashokasya. This discovery for the first time gave us that it's not anybody else, but it was Ashoka, who was the Piya. This one, Devanam Piya, he had that title also, and it is Ashokasya. This Manskay inscription was discovered in 1915. So for the first time, very affirmatively we came to know it was that man who had made all these kinds of inscription. It was he who had ruled the whole country. And then there was one more inscription that is known as Gujarrat inscription. So till that time, we did not know much about Buddha also, that Buddha was from Magadha, and he is scene of activity was in Magadha and all those things. And then things went on like that one. There was, Fahian was for the first time translated into, the travelogue of Fahian was for the first time translated into French in 1937. Then in 1940-41, part of it was translated into English also. So at that time, Alexander Cunningham, he did one thing. There were references about so many places. So he thought, all these places mentioned, because he knew this language also, Brahmi script also. So he discovered so many things. This one translated so many things. So he just thought that the description is about India, what Fahian had traveled, because by that time, during the time of Islamic attack, most of our universities like Nalanda, Vikramshila, most of them were completely looted, completely burned out, and there was no Buddhism. It was not a living religion in India. Since it was not a living religion in India, most of the people thought, there is no question of Buddha being an Indian. It was a living religion in Nepal. It was a living religion in this one, Sri Lanka. It was a living religion in Thailand. It was a living religion in Burma and in most of the Southeast Asian countries, but not in India. So absolutely there is no question of Buddha being an Indian. So these were the things. But now how to establish it substantially? So for that, he had given in this translation, few English translation, the reference about Kannauj was given. Why Kannauj? Kannauj was the capital of Harsha. So he had given, because he had gone to that place, Fahian and Huangsang, both of them had visited this place. And then he gives a description from Kannauj. If you go towards the northwest direction, you will be reaching a city known as Sankissa. In Sankissa, there is a huge Ashokan pillar, like the one you have already seen. And there you have got a stupa also. So he had given it, the measurement he had given it in yojanas. One yojana will be almost 9 to 10 miles at that time. So he went towards the northwest direction as per the description given by Fahian. And then he reached a small village known as Sangassa. Not Sankissa, but Sangassa. Now he knew that it is almost Sankissa itself. He wanted to discover those places which was mentioned in the description of Fahian and later on in Huangsang also. But Huangsang was not translated by that time. Huangsang was translated in 1857. This is, we are talking about in 1941-42 period. So then I think this one.
No, since you're not changing the slides,
Oh yes. Okay. You did it. Okay.
Yeah.
So no problem. So then when he saw this one, he saw at that the Sankissa, he got a pillar also. He got a pillar as was described by Fahian, and then he got that stupa also, on the basis of which he said, "This is India." And these were the places which were where about which this one Fahian has described. This is India. It is not neither Nepal, nor Burma, nor Thailand, nor China, nor any other country. It is India. And Buddha was an Indian, and he also Ashoka was also an Indian. He came to the conclusion. Now let us go back to the same this one.
Yes. Please go ahead. Yeah. So one thing, and maybe the other scholars may disagree, but in Mahabharata itself, when Vyasdev starts writing Mahabharata, he says there are 100,000 shlokas, Shata Sahasra, delivered to the
Uh-huh.
Maurya society,
Yes.
out of which 8,800 shlokas are very complex, which
Yeah.
are either I understand it, or whether Sanjay may understand it, or Shukdev Goswami understands it. He
Mm.
says that. So there's a big misconception there. And the third thing is, he says that just pointing out the Mahabharata, which is written over there in Sanskrit. The
Yeah.
third thing is, the third misconception is the Jaya.
Ah. Yeah.
So actually, the word Jaya means all itihas. Ramayana, Mahabharata. It's very well documented also. Tato Jayam Udirayet.
Hmm.
Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam
Yeah.
Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet. So
Yeah.
when you worship the Saraswati, Vyasa, and Narayan and Nara,
Yeah.
then you can actually read Jaya, which is all Itihas. So that is the meaning. It's not
Yeah.
the whole Mahabharata. And the another part is the confusion about 24,000 shloka Bharata, which you mentioned.
Mm.
That refers to Srimad Bhagavatam. That is a
Mm.
different compilation. But
Yeah.
Mahabharata was 100,000.
Yeah.
At Sathology, we have spoken to many people on that.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Because we have the Sanskrit evidence over there.
Yeah.
So that's the point. But we'll go
Ah.
ahead with this presentation.
Yes.
Yes.
So this Sata Sahasra that came in 7th century. For the first time, we get that reference. That came in 6th century. There is an Aihole inscription. It was on the base. It was for the first time. It was mentioned on that this one on that occasion.
But
So
it's
that
in the
came
book. It's in the book also. It's in Mahabharata Sanskrit text also.
Sanskrit. No, no, that is before 7th century AD. Do you have any reference?
No, I do
Sata.
not know. I do not know the age of the text of Mahabharata. But I
Yes,
can
yes.
quote you, it's part of the original Mahabharata. It's not part of corollary. It's part of the main Mahabharata book.
But as per the archaeologists, you don't have any reference about that one before 7th century.
Okay, you mean
And
to say the Mahabharata was not discovered before 7th century?
no, 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 we don't say that one. It was only we say this was earlier Jaya, then it became Bharat, and then it becomes Mahabharat.
Actually,
And
so in Mahabharata there are conversations going on.
mhm,
So Vyasadeva himself says that 100,000 were delivered to Manushya Loka.
mhm,
The preacher of that was Vaishampayan. And then he says there are 8,800 complex shloka, which actually we are digressing from the topic. We'll talk this about
yes, yes,
something else.
yes.
But since you
Okay,
mentioned it, I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
very
But
good, very good.
so it's 100,000 given to Manushya Loka. Then you have 24,000 called Bharat, which is additional, and there's 150 which is a corollary, and then there is 8,800 which is complex ones, and they were spoken to Ganesha so that Ganesha can take some more time to write. So therefore, the most of the scholars are wrong if you consider Mahabharata as a text, because when somebody, and big scholars are included there, that when they say 8,800 was the main shloka, that means they're wrong. If you compare that to Sanskrit Mahabharata, but if they're referring to something else, I would like to hear that.
No, because because there is always a problem with the archaeological dating and the Vedic dating and the astronomical dating, all these things. Even in astronomical datings also, there are many various datings. I mean, the same
But the letters,
thing they are using.
yeah, my point is, how can you date the letters? You
Which one?
you
No,
cannot date
actually,
the letters.
we sometimes, archaeology, we sometimes, about, for example, if you give a description of Yavanas, who is a Yavana? Yavana is a Greek man. So if you give a reference about Yavanas, that will not be before third century BC, because Greeks for the first time came into third and fourth century BC. But if you take the whole story before that one, I mean 1000 BC or 5000 BC, there you cannot get Yavanas. At that time, Yavana had come to India.
And
Similarly,
as
about
a, yeah, as an Indian historian,
uh,
like why can't this is just a wild question? As an Indian historian, why can't we stop comparing Vedic history from BC or AD? If you remove that reference,
of course, you can do that one, but you have to have a synchronology. Synchronology, we mean that in the whole world, whatever dating is there, so you have to have the dating of Mesopotamian civilization also, Egyptian civilization also, Greek civilization also, Chinese civilization also, Indian civilization also. So that is what we call synchronology. So we go for the synchronological dating, so that the entire history of mankind can be brought into one particular point.
yeah.
Otherwise, if you go, I mean, there will be confusion. If you have a Indian dating method, there will be confusion. For example, hieroglyphic dating is there, but they don't accept it. We don't accept it now.
So,
On the
so
basis of
do you think that synchronically dating, which you're mentioning the term here, it's a, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist in any
yes,
way.
yes,
So please,
yes, yes,
I don't. That's not my point. My
yeah.
point is that when you go about synchronizing all the histories of the world
Mhm.
and trying to fit into the same period or compare with the same period, then you may not come with the right analysis of the history, because just the city of Varanasi is well documented to be more than 10,000 years old. And ASI may not accept it because ASI may be considering synchronically with the
Yes,
Mesopotamian or Iranian or some other civilization.
yes, yes.
Do you think that methodology is itself wrong?
I think as an archaeologist, I feel that methodology is wrong. Varanasi cannot go to 10,000 BC, because in
No, I'm
10,000,
not
in
saying 10,000
800,
years. I'm saying 10,000 years back. So it is very clearly mentioned.
you cannot have a civilization in 2000 10,000 BC. You can have prehistoric, that is, I mean, you can have Neolithic, you have got Mesolithic, and all those things that is all over the world, not only in India. All over the world, I mean, civilization means you can go up to 4,000, 5,000 BC, not beyond that one. That would be an exaggeration. That, I mean, no, all over the world there is a civilization starting also. I'm talking about the civilization. I'm not talking about the Mesolithic. I'm not about prehistoric and Paleolithic. That is a different thing. Paleolithic all over the world, because it starts from, I mean, from Africa. Old Goch is there. That is 20-25 lakhs of years back. It starts from there. So there are many sites in this one. So is in the South Africa and various other places. And that is a different period. I
Yes,
think we'll shift
stick to the
from our.
topic. Yes.
So this is James Prinsep, who made the entire. I mean, this one. I mean, the second Eureka moment. It was due to him, and they used to have inscriptions like this one, Ashoka. These are about various other places. I mean, a number of places. This is a Kalsi inscription. So it is from Uttaranchal. Various inscriptions were discovered like this one.
So before we, what is your viewpoint on the historicity of Brahmi script? Was it before Devanagari or Devanagari was before that?
Of course, it was before Devanagari. Devanagari has evolved out of this one. Before Devanagari, much before Devanagari. So these are, I mean, from this one, different inscriptions. This is an inscription from Sarnath, and here in this one you can see that is, I mean, from Shahbaz Gadi. Shahbaz Gadi is of course in the present day, even this one Pakistan, Afghanistan area. Then Kandahar, from there also we have got an inscription, Ashokan inscription. Kalsi, Topra, Meerut, Dorianandangarh, Doriaraj, and the whole place, this kind of inscription. So this is the way, I mean, the way they came to know that this is Behistam inscription. This was also in 3 languages, not in India, in Persia. Here you can see all the 3 languages: Greek, then I mean this one Coptic, and then Persian, Elamite languages. And then, because we did not know that Buddha was, the stupa was also, I mean, Buddhist, we did not know about that one. This is the stupa of Sarnath. But when this was excavated in 1835 by Alexander Cunningham, he just he could not understand what it was. And then it was in 1846, it was again excavated by another man, Kittu. So at that time, he got a number of sculptures of Buddha. So for the first time, they came to know this has got some association with Buddha. And then there was an inscription also, that this inscription was about Buddhist confession of faith. So it was almost sure, no, this is a
In one of the last discussion at Sataoji, you
yeah.
had told us about a 1500-year-old Adi Shankaracharya who stayed in one place and did a tapasya. He wrote in Madhya Pradesh, you told one place around 1500 years back.
Omkarishan?
Omkaresh, yes.
Yeah.
And then
at 16, but these are traditional dating. I don't think that he would have been able to, because say at the age of 13, he wrote so many books. I don't think, because as an archaeologist, that is the belief of the faithful, and that is written also. But is it possible, unless you are a child prodigy? Of course, that is a different thing. If you are a child prodigy, of course, that is the thing. Otherwise, that is not possible. At the age of 13, 16. Yeah. And I had taken you to that Amarkantak also, where he had, yes. So in this one, they got these 2 things, and then there was another inscription that is known as Basantapala inscription. In that Basantapala inscription also, it was now very sure this has got association with Buddha and Buddhism. So for the first time, they came to know about these things. And this is another stupa. It is known as Chaukandi stupa. I saw the stupa like this one, and then I started the excavation work. So when I started the excavation, I got again a Buddhist sculpture from here. And now it looks like this one. Because this is my garden, is my trademark. So wherever I go, I not only conserve it, excavate it, conserve it, and then put up a beautiful garden all around so that people can go see and then enjoy it also.
No, I think you have done one of the best work in ASI. I mean, I've not seen others' presentations, but whatever you have done is you have done it with full call it devotion, not just archaeology. You've done it with devotion. That I've seen that. Every single place that you've either restored or you moved, you have brought back to its original glory as much as we can.
Yes.
Touching the historicity, that I have seen.
Thank you so much. It was a devotion, passion, and I did it very well. Yeah.
And then your cultural faith in these symbols, because some people may see it as a broken buildings.
Yes.
But to restore it back and make it accessible to people, that's an art.
Yes.
That is not just a archaeological work. After that, it becomes a passion.
Bilkul. And what I do is I make a storytelling also. Because every monument has got a story of its own. If you narrate that story and in a very beautiful way, people would be automatically attracted to it. So
Yeah.
that is what I do. That not only, I mean, the physical beauty of the charm, and there is an internal beauty, and that internal beauty, that is divinity, and also that storytelling you just attached with it. Then it becomes a place, and then you would be able to put a tongue in each and every stone, and the stones will speak to you. So create that kind of positive energy in the place.
So
That
one of
is what.
just I want to welcome one of the audience. One of the congressmen from the U.S. Congress has joined,
Uh-huh.
and Daryl Lisa is listening. And so welcome, Daryl, and just to welcome him, he's also listening to this presentation. He's a
Oh,
historian from he's an American historian and a very prominent congressman. He's one of the richest congressmen of U.S. history.
wonderful,
Thank you, Daryl,
wonderful,
for
great.
joining. Please, yeah, go ahead.
Welcome, sir. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So this one this is the great Bodh Gaya this one temple where Buddha had attained spirituality and Buddhahood. So there also, because it was in the hands of a group of Hindu Shivite group of people, and people had forgotten about, because Bhaktiar Khilji, he had completely killed all the monks. Monks had completely left the place, and all of them had ran away. The Buddhism was completely, wiped out from in India. So this was taken by a group of Shiva Mutt people, and then when this was part of it was excavated, from there also a number of inscription came out saying that it was the place which is associated with Buddha. So now Buddhism started coming up in India, and we also started discovering. But there were certain places where it was not known. Now, looking at this, look at just at this place. Are you able to identify this place?
No, cannot.
You cannot. Nobody can identify it. See, this was one of the major historical sites of India, and one of the major universities, because while Paris University was not there, while Oxford University was not there, while Cambridge University was there, Paris University came in 11th and 12th century AD, then came Oxford University in 12th century, and then came Cambridge University. But 700 years before, this was a full-fledged University of India, but it was completely destroyed by Bhakti Khilji. And then people had left the place, but a man who was a shepherd, he built a house over this one. So he built a house. Can you see this house?
Yes.
Yes, he built a house. In course of time, because the place of the name of the place had also changed. It is known as Badgaon. Badgaon means Badagaon. So he could not, Alexander Cunningham and many other people, they could not, connect with this one. This was for the first time. This was explored by a person known as Buchanan, Hamilton Buchanan. So in course of time, this family members increased. He made a house here also. Just see, one house is already there, and then there is another house. Then people had their own doubt. Many people identified this site because there was a huge conical mound. When Alexander Hamilton came, he saw conical mounds, and then he got that square patches that was also in the form of a mound. He asked some of the people, "What is this one?" So they said it was near this one, Rajgir. So Rajgir was the capital of Bimbisara, the first empire. So they said, no, this is associated with it was the palace of Bimbisara and Ajatashatru. Many people thought so. But then once, this was Fahian and Huangsang. That was Huangsang was translated. That was translated in 1857. People came to know that it's not this one palace of Bimbisara. This is the great Nalanda University. the great Nalanda University. And now the excavation started. For that, we had to dismantle this house. Let us dismantle and let us know what is coming out. Just see, can you see a corner tower here?
Yes.
A corner tower. That means that is something, and it is going to reveal so many things now. So for that, you have to go further down. Further down, this means this is a corner town, full corner town.
Wow.
If an archaeologist gets a corner town, we have a this house is yet to be dismantled. The first house is yet to be dismantled. So we know if you get one corner tower, you will be getting one corner tower here, third one on the backside, and then fourth one on the backside. We call it Panchayatana. Panchayatana form will be during the Gupta period, that is from 4th century onwards, you will be having this one. For example, if it is a Shiva temple, the Shiva would be there in the center, and then Parvati would be on one side, then there will be Ganesha on the other side, then there will be others on the other side. So that is known as Panchayatana. And then when it was further excavated, it became, you got another corner tower here. And now when you go to this place, you find the place like this.
Wow.
And this is not in its real form. This archaeologist, they wanted to show people in different phases of your excavation. So I call it, it is very badly exposed. Should not have been like this one. It was a stupa actually. And then in the 8th century, they filled it up. Then they made a temple on top of it. But that I call it, it's a very bad conservation, because it gives a wrong impression about the whole stupa. And now, so I said that when Hamilton came, he had two things. One is the conical mound and the square mounds. And what is this conical mound? From the conical mound, archaeologists of ASI, Archaeological Survey of India, they excavated a number of temples. All 4 temples were excavated. And what is the square mound? That was the monastery where the students lived. And each monastery, that was 4-storied. The greatest ever excavated university you are going to see. So we started from here. Only this house was there. The family members increased. He made one more construction here. Now for our excavation, we had to dismantle this one. We got this corner tower. Further excavation, we got the entire corner tower. And now one more corner tower. And now it looks like this one. Now you see it like this. And once upon a time, this had 10,000 students and 1,500 teachers in this university. And that too, 700 years before Oxford, 700 years before Paris University, Strasbourg University, and Cambridge University. And it was actually like this. So one corner tower, second corner tower, third corner tower, fourth corner tower, and then there was a stupa. But at a later period in 9th and 10th centuries, what they did is they filled up the entire thing, and then they constructed a huge temple over this one. And how did Buchanan Hamilton see the whole place? They saw it like this one. One conical mound, second conical mound, and there were 4 conical mounds like this one. And just opposite to that one, there were square mounds. This is that square mounds. It's a completely barren land, and the conical mound is just in front of you here. Another one is here, and another one is here. And now out of this barren land, what we are going to do is we are going to excavate a huge university. You would be surprised to see that huge university. out of the simple barren square patches. Just keep this picture in your mind. Conical mound, square patches, excavation started. Many sculptures started coming out. A very big excavation. You can see that conical mound, huge mound. And then the square patches, when that was excavated, a number of cells, rooms.
And these pictures are from which year you're saying these pictures are from?
These are from 1915 onwards.
1915, okay.
1915 onwards. Methodical, even in 1871 also excavation was conducted. 1862 also it was done. But a methodical excavation started coming out from 1915 onwards. And here you can see there is a well and they are lifting water from here. These are the cells for monks. In each room there were 3 monks were there, and now that has been conserved also. You have that well here, and this was the platform where the teacher used to sit and the students used to sit here. You can see the mound that it is not yet excavated. Another one, because there were 4 mounds like this. And then I took up the conservation work. I was, posted here in 1997. So it was a dream coming true. So I said that, the major scale excavation should be taken up. And then I started a major program for the conservation. I saw most of the stupas like this one. And I got the students also and the local people also, because they should be proud of their own heritage. And with the help of the students, the local people, because they are the real stakeholders. Officers, they may come this year and they may go next year. And just see and how got all of them conserved. And similarly, all these were excavated places. These are the monasteries, and each were them 4-story, 10,000 students and 1,500 teachers. And just opposite to that, 1, 2, 3, 4 temples. Every morning students will get up, they will complete their this one morning work, and then they will go to the temple for worship.
And these temples were for which deities or just general there?
No, this is only Buddhist. But of course, we have certain Hindu deities also on the back side. Other side we have got.
So Nalanda was a Buddhist site?
It was a Buddhist site. It was a great Buddhist site, Buddhist learning. But of course, there was no restriction for other things also, because all the Vedas were taught there. All the Upanishads were taught. Because, the whole Buddhist philosophy comes out from the Upanishads.
Correct.
There were not Upanishads, Buddha perhaps, he would not have been able to propound such a great philosophy.
Yeah, it's ironical because in the scriptural side, Buddha is said to come to reject the Veda. But here we see his philosophy coming from Upanishad.
Yes. Sarve bhavantu suginam, sarve santu nirameya, sarve bhadrani. All this comes, That is that human love. And Upanishad, that is the zenith of human thought. And I don't want to say Indian thought, it is the zenith of human thought.
Human thought, yeah.
You don't have it.
The word India is a very recent word. Vedic and Sanatan traditions are much older.
Yes.
Beyond any faith, modern faith, beyond any modern nomenclature.
Yes. That is that Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, and everything comes out of this one. Yes. It's a great philosophy I call it the zenith of human thought. You cannot compare anything with that Upanishads. And now, if you go to the place, you can see it like this one.
And I like your statement on that there because there's a huge study, and I have many students today here in this call which are live, and many of them are fascinated by Upanishad, and especially Gita Upanishad.
Yes,
It's,
really.
it's a one book, but it transcends as if the whole world is speaking.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. And my identification of this place is this was a great library because it has three important libraries: Ratnaganja, Ratnodadi, Ratnasagara. Three great libraries were there, and all of them were completely burned by Bhakti Khilji. And if you go there, you can still see the burn marks over the bricks because it might have burned for, I mean, for many hours or for many days. It was such a wonderful library, and this was, I mean, the library was, I mean, it was in many languages because in the whole Southeast Asia, because there were students from all over this one Southeast Asian country, from China, from Burma, from Thailand, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from almost all the Southeast Asian countries, and then from Nepal, from Pakistan. Pakistan at that time was not an Islamic country. Pakistan, Afghanistan, the whole the world was, in Nalanda, and in various languages they translated it. When Huyang Sang went from here, he took near about 675 books from here, and he got it translated into Chinese. And look at it. Just think of that barren land and compare this one, the work ASI has carried out.
Oh, this is
And
phenomenal. Phenomenal.
yeah, I'll be showing you some more photographs. Then you'll have to use some other words other than phenomenal. And these were four storied. How would you say archaeologically this was four story? Just look at this staircase for going up. And Huang Sang says that it was for each this one monastery was four storied. And now again coming up, just compare this photograph now with this photograph.
Totally unrecognizable. It's like,
Yeah.
and I'm,
And I'm going to show you some more speaking photographs.
oh, this is,
Just look at it.
I lost my words now. No more
Yeah.
phenomenal. It's
Yes.
better than that.
This was that library. And I'm going to show you one more photograph, which is a very, just look at it.
Huge. It's huge.
Good university.
And how many acres of land is this is?
This is 100 acres, but what I did is I gave another proposal while I was there in 2000. I said that this is not enough for this university. Many of these villages, I mean, these are the villages, all of them have got many more monasteries like this one. It was a great sprawling university. So rehabilitate the people from there, because all these things, if you look at the village, you will be able to see that, there are many monasteries even now concealed in this housing complex. So I said that we have to acquire all this area, and then entrance should be, changed from the traditional entrance to another place, and people should come from there, and then they should feel the majesty of the university. That was my proposal.
You
Of
know,
course, it took.
I think, like if this thing is developed, I mean, this will be the biggest tourist attraction of India for being
Yes, yes. This is would be the biggest one.
the biggest one. I mean, it's almost like if I see all the area that you're showing me,
Hmm.
I can easily say that you're looking at almost 1,000 acres of development here,
Yes.
easily.
People would be coming like this one, And again, I said, as I told you, you have to have look at this one,
Mhm.
and just compare that old this one, the before excavation photograph. Compare that one with this one. And then you have to tell the story how Huang Sang had come, how he had crossed 6,000 kilometers of area, of area connecting. This he crossed 7 countries, and at that time you had to have permission for crossing this one, China. So he was stopped on the way at the Chinese border. So he said, because he was full of passion like all of us. He said, if you want to take my life, you can take. You have the liberty. But I, Huang Sang, will not turn back towards China. You can kill me. So the man who was there at the post, that at the barrier, he was a Buddhist. He thought if this man dies, then the whole sin would be on him. So he permitted him to go from here, and then he showed him that there is a deviated way. You can go through that deviated way, so that you will not be checked by the sentry people. So when he reached Terfan, another place, there the king was a Buddhist king. He stopped him. You are such a great scholar. You live here. He said he went on a hunger strike. So the first hunger strike was at the border of China. It was not Mahatma Gandhi who had introduced the hunger strike. It was actually Huang Sang. So he started the second hunger strike. He said that I am going to die if you do not permit me to go to Nalanda. I wanted to see Buddha's birthplace. So he went out from there. So again the king thought that if this man dies, then the sin would be on me. So he let him go, and then he came.
No,
Just
you are taking away the last credit from Mahatma Gandhi also.
no, it's not that way. It's not that way. It doesn't listen, but Mahatma Gandhi, he had learned a lot of things from Mahatma Buddha and also from Huang Sang. With all humility and with all, humbleness, I say, not taking anything from here, but they were great saints. So just look at this photograph and also compare that photograph. And these are the inscription, and this inscription speak when this one about the greatness of the university. What a great university it was. It was taught, they had, every day there used to be 100 classes. This inscription says.
And this inscription is Devanagari because I could read it.
Yes. This is this late inscription because, this is, the 13th century inscription. And many things are in Devanagari because you have it. And some of even the bricks also had inlay work like this one. Semi-precious stones were inserted here in all these places. Semi-precious stones were inserted. Even in the bricks also. This is of course not from Nalanda, this is from Vaishali. And for the regulation of the times, they had this kind of water clock. So if it start immersing, because all through this pores, water will come down. If it takes 20 minutes for one immersion. And then there will be a bell at that time. So they used to, this one, regulate the timing on the basis of this one. Huang Sang again speaks about it. This again, one of the seals. This you can very easily read. Sri Narandaya Mahavihara Arya Bhikshu Sanghasya. The name of the place has changed. Nobody knew that it was Nalanda, but then it was this inscription and also some other inscription. For the first time, they gave...
Yeah, Sri Nalanda Mahavihara, Sri... and what is
Sri Narandaya Mahavihara Arya Bhikshu Sanghasya.
Arya Bhikshu Sanghasya.
It's an old Nagari. Arya Bhikshu Sanghasya. So this is one of the temples. The second story, this is the second story, first story, second story, and all of them were 4-story. And then I took up the conservation work of all these things. And then when further excavated, we could get, because the origin of this, earlier we were thinking it was in 4th century, but now it has almost gone to 2nd century BC. Many new things were discovered. So it had started from 2nd century BC. Even before that, during the period of Nalanda, Buddha itself, Buddha used to come to this place. So in Mahaparinirvana Sutra, there is one sloka, Ekam Samayam Bhagava Nalandayam Viharadi Pavarikambravane. So all these places we could excavate, and for removing this earth, they used this kind of trains also. It was a huge excavation, and I could rediscover this thing because it was completely when people had thrown out, but we got it out. And it is, because I had a close connection with the monks also. So when they came to know that I have come after getting my Padma Shri, I went to the place for doing my puja. So from all the monasteries, people came to receive me and gave this one gifts like this one. And this was the great Huyang Tsang. The man, he came, on foot to India, crossing the major 7 countries, crossing near about 1,600 kilometers at that time, miles at that time. And then he took many books from here and many relics also from here. He went to China. He made a monastery for them, and for the translation bureau, he established there. He had many translation bureaus there. So one was this one, big wild goose pagoda, small wild goose pagoda in all these places. And one day the Chinese king, emperor, he came and he said, Master, you have translated so many Buddhist books from Sanskrit into China. Why can't you this one translate at least one Laozi book, because Confucianism and Laoism was a Buddhist religion. Why can't you at least translate one Chinese book, that of Laozi, from Chinese language into Sanskrit, so that there will be an exchange of this one? But the great man, he refused. He said, I will not do that one. The entire wisdom is in India only. So that is why I had come that with the wisdom of India, that should be translated into this one Chinese this language. But the other way, I will not do. So that was his reply. Then he was offered a post of a minister. So he said, I will not take up it because, I have got my other assigned duties. He refused it. So we used to arrange a number of meetings like this for the common people. And this, as you know, this is the big pagoda. This is known as Big Wild Goose Pagoda, where most of the translations were taking place. These are all big pagodas, small pagoda, all these things. These are all in China because of the impact of India. And this we know because the great Bamiyan Buddha, which was destroyed again by Muslim fanatics, another great destruction. The whole world tried to stop it, but this one, the extremists, they had gone to that kind of extent, and now there is an effort is going on all over the world to rebuild it. And this is, of course, the Great White Horse Monastery in China. These are all China. I will rush through this one because it's all because of Indian influence, because otherwise it will take a lot of time. And now what I had done is I had again, because at one site near Nalanda I saw a number of sculptures like this one. So I made a small village museum there itself, so that that would be preserved. Otherwise, it was the hunting ground of all kinds of smugglers. I just wanted to conserve it. So there was a local Shiva temple. Around the local Shiva temple, I made a museum there. The village people were there because I used to take them along with me. I am sitting here. many sculptures. Then around this village, we made a museum. It is known as People's Museum at Sandimo. Right? I mean, the contributions were taken from the common people, and I too provided at that time a 2,000 rupees. That was in 2000. And there was one Chinese monk also. He gave us one 12,000 rupees at that time. This is this. He's from China. Sorry, he's from China. This one, Periyalingere, that is his name. But a great man, and he helps people. So I made the first rural museum there, and then I got many Karsevaks also for Kumbrahar. Kumbrahar was the capital of India almost for 500 years. That was, engrossed by so many people, so I had to remove the encroachment. Had a virtual fight. Then I got all the intellectuals because I said that you should come. It is our own heritage. You should do Karseva. And then ASI plans adopt a heritage. Got the students also involved in this one. All the intellectuals and all the press people. So with the help of the press and other common people, all the encroachments were removed. And this was my proposal. I said that all the Buddhist sites, they should have a common this one, a gateway like this one. It's all taken from Buddhist this one, Buddhist stupas. You should have like this one, and the benches should be like this one. This is again a Buddhist component, and even the feet also, the feet of the lion, because it's a great symbol of Lord Shiva. And then even that this one cultural notice board should be like this. So this way I had made a proposal, but at that time I could not implement it because I was transferred. But now after almost 20 years, recently the government has implemented part of the acquisition program, but not the entire acquisition program, which I had planned. Because, for that you have to have the entire area. Now, do we have time now? Because, the Nalanda portion I have completed. Now, if I take it up again, at least it will take 15 minutes to go.
Can you do a next recording, because I think it's very late for people. So,
yes.
So maybe we do a next recording next week and continue with this presentation.
Let us make it after 2 weeks, because I have got so many programs.
Okay. Yeah. So in 2 weeks we can do the second part of this series, so that we can complete this, because people have a lot of interest, but yes, some people it's a Sunday and many people have to leave for their research in other places. So so thank you all for watching, and thank you, Congressman, for coming here and watching with us. And I think this is just a beginning. KK Mohammad's, Shri KK Mohammad is one of the recipients of the highest civilian awards, Padma Shri, and of India. It's instituted by the government of India. So it's just like it will be a president's medal in the US compared to that. So we had Congressman joining today, so thank you so much. And also rest of the people who are there, I give you back your rest of the Sunday, and we'll come back with Shri KK Mohammad again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.